Hello and welcome to Africa Today. I am Mike Okwoche. Nature expects every act to create an equal and opposite reaction. But that was not the case after a recent report by Human Rights Watch left many baffled with a "what were they thinking" kind of reaction. Soldiers under the African Union mission in Somalia, AMISOM, have been accused of sexually abusing and exploiting women and girls in the war-torn country. Now, according to the report, AMISOM troops rely on Somali intermediaries and use a range of tactics, including humanitarian aid, to lure victims. Now, what do you make of the allegations of sexual abuse by peacekeeping forces in Somalia? You can share with us on Twitter at TVC Africa Today, or send an email to africatoday@tvcnews.tv. We'll take a report now, and Africa Today will continue. Thanks for joining us.
Somali Authority on Tuesday says they would investigate charges that women and girls in the capital, Mogadishu, have been raped by African peacekeepers, a principal source of security in the war-torn country. A recent report released by the group Human Rights Watch documented the rape or sexual exploitation of 21 women and girls at peacekeeping bases run by the African Union Mission in Somalia, AMISOM.
In this report, we document cases of sexual exploitation, so the abuse of power, the abuse of very vulnerable populations for sexual favors, as well as cases of rape by the African Union forces on two of their main bases in Mogadishu. And what we found was that a lot of the women and girls, all of them from internally displaced people's camps, so already incredibly vulnerable populations, are actually often being lured in and coerced into exploitative relationships with the use of medical assistance, which is being provided by the mission on their bases in Mogadishu.
Just two of the women and girls interviewed by the rights group had filed a complaint. Somalia has been deep in chaos and conflict since the overthrow of President Siad Barre in 1991. The government is struggling to reimpose order and a new federal structure as it battles Islamist militant group Al-Shabaab. The African Union Mission in Somalia, or AMISOM, was deployed in 2007. Its uniformed force, which numbers more than 22,000, comes from Uganda, Burundi, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Sierra Leone. The Commission denies the allegation, saying the report amounts to a misrepresentation of the sacrifices, achievements, and genuine commitment of AMISOM in support of peace in Somalia. Amina Hamid, Africa Today.
All right, in its 71-page document released recently, Human Rights Watch says it has accounts of vulnerable Somali women and girls who have been victims of sexual abuse by soldiers since 2003. Or 2013, rather. Now, joining us on Africa Today, we have Innocent Chukwuma, a representative of Ford Foundation West Africa. You're welcome to Africa Today.
Thank you so much.
It's good to have you around.
Same here.
All right, and also on phone, we have Laetitia Bada, a researcher with the Human Rights Watch. He was one of those involved in packaging that report together. And we certainly will have him when the time comes. Now, let's start it this way. Soldiers who are on peacekeeping mission are supposed to help reduce threat, ensure there is peace, make everybody happy and calm, everything goes on together. But when they become part of the threat, it means there's a big problem on ground. What's your assessment on what's going on as far as peacekeeping and abuse are concerned in Somalia?
It's a very unfortunate development, as you rightly pointed out, that people who are brought in to protect the civilian population turn around to prey on them. It leads you to the question, who guards the guardians? Who polices the police? I mean, when you have people who are supposed to be guided by the highest level of professional standing, these are people picked from various countries, and I would imagine among the best that they can offer, turn around to behave this way. But the thing is, it's also important to point out that this has had a long history. When we had the wars in Sierra Leone, in Liberia, we had cases, if you even want to trace it back, the Nigerian Civil War between 1967 and 1970. What popular literature talk about is the about 3 million people that died. But if you go beyond the number of fatalities and see what young girls went through in that war, nothing has been written about it. And I guess that's why over the years you have had movements, especially by the UN and also the African Union, to ensure that before people are deployed to peacekeeping missions, they are supposed to be vetted. Those who have human rights abuse record are not supposed to be involved. And even before they are deployed, they are supposed to be trained. The AU has a code of conduct that are used in training these people. So when they go out there in the field and behave this way, it calls into question all these measures, whether they are enough or more needs to be added on to them, as Human Rights Watch adequately pointed out in this report. And lastly, before I leave it there, this is also not in recent time. I think earlier this year, Human Rights Watch also did publish a similar report about the behavior of soldiers under AU mission in Central African Republic. They call it MISCA. This one is a mission. In March, there was a situation where a soldier from Congo-Brazzaville was alleged to have been killed by some of the militia group, I think the anti-Beleka group, and 4 others were injured. And as a result of that, they apparently went on a vengeful mission, and 11 people were, disappeared. Up till now, nobody knows what has happened to those people, and among them are 4 women.
Wow, that's really quite disheartening. We'll come back to this. Now, joining the discussion via phone on Africa Today, we have Latitia Bada, a researcher with the Human Rights Watch. Now, Latitia, it's good to have you on Africa Today. Now, what were some of the key findings with research by Human Rights Watch on AMISOM troops? Can you let us into some of your findings?
Well, basically, we found that over the course of the last year, certain members of the African Union forces in Mogadishu, now these are mainly the Ugandan and Burundian forces which are currently deployed to Mogadishu, have been sexually abusing and also exploiting women and girls on their bases in Mogadishu. And so we basically found most of the cases we document in this report have taken place on 2 of the main bases, so the Burundian contingent base and also the main Amazon base camp, which is where the leadership, the military, civilian and police leadership of the force is actually based. And what we found was that given the fact that there is actually not much interaction between the soldiers and the local population outside of the bases, soldiers have been using, often with Somali intermediaries, have been using the few opportunities when women and girls are actually coming onto the bases to lure them in. In some cases, there have been cases of rape, but in some cases, they're lured into exploitative relationships. And so what we found was that actually it's when women and girls are coming to get medical assistance at the outpatient clinics on the bases that they're initially approached and then coerced into these relationships. And so not only we've had cases of exploitation, some of these relationships have become violent. Some of the women and girls told us that the soldiers refused to wear condoms, so then they ended up with sexually transmitted illnesses. And one of, what is particularly alarming is that all of the women and girls we spoke to for this report are from internally displaced communities, which really highlights the incredible vulnerability of these women and girls, but also the incredible power difference between the soldiers and the survivors.
All right, now the AU Commission has expressed some concern of imbalance and some level of distortion contained in the report. How would you react to this?
Well, I think, if you look at the report, we have spent quite a lot of time trying to investigate what troop contributing countries have been doing generally on the accountability front. And so, we conducted research in Uganda and Burundi to look at what sort of investigative capacity is being deployed to Somalia. We encountered, for example, that the fact that Uganda actually in late 2012 up to 2013 sent a military court to Mogadishu, which, is a very good practice. Unfortunately, the court has since been recalled to Uganda. But what we do find in the report is that although, resources have been deployed, the issue of tackling sexual exploitation and the use of these resources to investigate allegations of sexual exploitation and abuse that's not where the resources are being deployed. And so, at the same time, we have, throughout the research, reached out both to the leadership of the troop contributing countries, sharing initial findings with them, asking them for feedback, also with the leadership of Amazon. And so, I think on many fronts, we have as much as possible tried to engage with them, and we do hope we can continue. I think maybe just one area to point out where there is a sense that we maybe were not as engaging as they would have wanted to in the AU reaction was that they felt we hadn't shared individual cases with them. But obviously, with two exceptions of the 21 women and girls we spoke to, none of them had filed complaints. They're very scared about filing complaints of reprisals. They're scared of reprisals from the soldiers, from the armed group Al-Shabaab, which would, has often targeted individuals who are seen as engaging with the enemy. And so, we obviously, when we interview them, guarantee them a level of confidentiality and anonymity. And so, we cannot share that sort of information with the African Union. And so, I do hope that there will be more discussions where we can explain how we do our research and what we can and cannot do.
All right, Latitia, thank you very much for talking to Africa Today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
She said so many things as a kid, but let me bring it back home. You were mentioning peacekeeping in Sierra Leone, in Liberia, in the ones that have taken place before, which means the issues of abuse, this is not the first time it's taking place, but is this peculiar to African troops generally, African peacekeeping?
I wouldn't say it's peculiar to African peacekeeping troops. I would say, if you permit, it is more the case with troops from developing countries across the world. We have had cases, we have troops from Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and other places have been involved in this. And it's a reflection of the level of professionalism, the level of accountability that you have in the security forces from the contributing countries, because you can't give what you don't have. For instance, we have actually had one involving some Nigerian troops. I think it was in Congo DRC. A number of them were recalled for cases relating to sexual abuse. So across Africa and the developing world, if you want to put it charitably, you will say our security forces are still in the developmental stage of reaching a level of professional standards that you and I can beat our chests about. But also one has to admit the challenge. Organizations like AU that send these peacekeepers, because one, you have to have willing countries that
exactly they're donating soldiers.
So you don't have a choice. When you see people being killed in internal revolts, civil wars, and you are calling all over the continent, please send keepers, is those that you have available that you deploy. But having accepted them, then you have a measure of responsibility to ensure that even if they are coming from countries that you cannot say, oh, that their level of accountability is high, then you train them, you vet them on their own, and make sure that when they are deployed, you have mechanisms in the place right there in the field to supervise them. And those who come short of the code, you set exemplary punishment. That will send the signal that this is not tolerated within the AU.
Okay, we'll come back to this. Now, about 22,000 African Union peacekeepers from Uganda, Burundi, Kenya, Ethiopia, Sierra Leone, and Djibouti, alongside Somali forces, have been battling Al-Shabaab insurgents since 2007. And accredited with gradually restoring order to Somalia, how far will allegations of sexual exploitation affect AMISOM's peacekeeping credentials on the continent? We'll go on a quick break, and Africa Today will continue. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us on Africa Today. Now, the AU has rejected claims of sexual atrocities by AMISOM troops in Somalia. Meanwhile, the government in that country says it will continue to engage troops, investigate allegations, and establish an effective framework on military engagement with civilians. All right, now, this is usually the case. We haven't seen any major prosecution of any soldier of any kind involved in extrajudicial killing or abusing anyone or assaulting anyone ever. Why do we have such kind of situations?
Well, is a function of a pervasive impunity. When people do this kind of thing and get away with it, and the institution deploying them comes in with this blanket denial that that is not the case, it sends a message to those who are out there that you can actually do this and get away with it. If AU, one is also not saying that there has not been cases of investigation in the past. She mentioned the good practice that Uganda introduced by actually sending a court-martial to Uganda, to Somalia to investigate, but we hardly read reports about the outcomes of this investigation. Exactly. And more importantly, who is held to account? Who is held to account? Because if somebody is uniformed and armed and sent there on the field, the person has a high level of responsibility to account at the end of the day. Exactly. Because the only difference between a soldier, a police, and a criminal on the field is the discipline. You know, the code that is supposed to guide him or her while out there in the field. And when this code is not effective, when the institutions sending them are not responsive enough to hold them to account, then there's no difference between them and any armed person, any armed militia on the street. Exactly. And that is highly unfortunate.
Now, in this kind of situation, what will be the impact of this kind of abuses on the peacekeeping process by itself? Because the people themselves who are supposed to feel safe, where there are soldiers, this kind of situation certainly will make them safe. So how will this interplay affect the ordinary people who they're supposed to protect?
It leaves them in double jeopardy situation. On the one hand, they are running away from Al-Shabaab terrorists, and then now they also have to
contend with soldiers.
You know, to be careful when interacting with these peacekeepers. It's like between the devil and the deep blue sea. Pour them. You know, but I think AU should do more than this blanket denial. They need to use this report and similar cases that have happened in recent time, like the one in Central African Republic, to send a message out there that this cannot be tolerated and work more closely with the countries contributing these peacekeepers to ensure that the necessary process they need to go through, i.e. vetting those whom you are sending. If anybody has a record of human rights abuse, that person need not to be on the mission. And more importantly, train them. AU has a code of conduct on this, although there's also call for them to come up with a policy on prevention and response to this kind of case when it happens. All this put in place, you know, needs to go down to, you know, send a message that we cannot tolerate this kind of situation.
It's all right. Now, in this kind of situation, if an abuse has been identified, what are the ideals in trying to get to the root of this kind of situation?
It's the usual procedure you have in investigating any abuse. First, the person who is alleged to have been involved need to be isolated from the rest of the truth through suspension. And unfortunately, you know, part of the agreement, AU and other agencies that deploy peacekeepers, such as the UN, is that if any of them is involved in this kind of abuse, AU cannot actually put them to trial. They have to be sent back to their country to try, exactly. Because you have these diplomatic agreements that bind them. But then if they are sent back to the countries that contributed them, then those countries are expected to put the full machinery of judicial process in place to properly investigate them, and if they're culpable, bring them to trial. Okay. And when the trial is over, make public the report of such. It will go down to send the message that this is not tolerated. And the contributing countries need to know that these people are the ambassadors. The way they behave out there in the field has a lot to say about the countries that send them in the first place.
Okay, there was a situation some moments ago, about a few days ago, in Nigeria, in southwest Nigeria, in Ibadan, where a soldier was accused of raping a student of a polytechnic. Now, in this kind of situation, this is not even a peacekeeping situation. Now, who monitors how soldiers and armed forces behave when they're supposed to be on duty, as the case may be?
Well, you know, every security agencies, especially the military, pride itself of being a disciplined profession, and they have internal mechanisms. They have the military police, they have the court martial. These are all mechanisms in place for dealing with this kind of thing. But what you find, unfortunately, when something like this gets out and it gets reported, is that the institution closes in to defend its own. It's as if they value the privilege more of their reputation vis-a-vis the incident than getting to the bottom and internalizing that professional standard is something every soldier needs to imbibe. You know, that makes it, you know, like I said earlier, differentiate the person from any other armed person on the street. But unfortunately, what happens, especially in this part of the world, is when something like this happens, rather than use it as a, you know, a symptom that you need to follow through to get to the bottom of the matter, they see it more, oh, our reputation is at stake, we have to close into. And by doing that, the whole thing festers. It's like one apple that you put in a basket, and over time, it gets others rotting.
Now, in this, certainly, earlier you talked about the fact that in the developing countries, you find some of these things. But apart from the situation of coming from a developing country, is it likely, is it possible that maybe if the soldiers are not motivated enough, sometimes they get involved in abuses? Is it?
Yeah, I mean, the situation here is that a lot of factors contribute to this. We also have to look at, especially not in the case of this sexual abuse, but in the larger case of human rights abuse, it's also the threat level, the mentality of the soldier. In that split second, the person has to make a life and death decision, and how long the person has been out there in the field. I mean, if you are deployed to these war centers where every day you come in contact with people dying and also participating in some of that, it does get back to the person. It does affect. That's why it's required that periodically, usually 6 months, at most 1 year, people need to be moved back to their country, reinserted into the institution, get back their sanity level before they are considered for other posting. But in countries where our soldiers are overexposed, like now in Nigeria, outside the Boko Haram insurgency in the northeast, it's on record that the military are actually supporting police operations in over 20 countries, 20 states in Nigeria. Some even say as much as 2/3 of the states in Nigeria, the military are involved in regular police operations. So at every point in time, you don't have soldiers to spare, you don't have soldiers to rest, so people are constantly deployed, so it does get back. And when you don't have effective mechanism for dealing with the psychological issues that these people go through, it does contribute. But as I said, it's not an excuse, you know, that because you're going through this, that you should go and take it out on the civilian population, because you are separated from the rest. You have a special calling, you have a special training, society invested a lot on you, and you are expected to behave differently as a member of a disciplined profession.
All right. Now, how relevant are these kind of issues, because they involve human rights abuses? How relevant are they before the International Criminal Court?
Well, some of these abuses, for instance, enforced disappearances, is not tolerated under any circumstances, not even a state of war, state of emergency, and the person who is found culpable in that may actually be tried under the ICC court, depending on the level of the atrocity.
Okay. So for the future of peacekeeping generally, although we look forward to a future of Africa where there won't be need for peacekeeping, but certainly anything can happen.
Sure.
Now, what should be the actual rule of engagement for young soldiers to look up to try to maintain?
You need to look at it from 2 levels. You know, because you don't have to wait until the people are sent on peacekeeping mission to know what they actually at the level of the countries contributing them. Professional standards needs to be up. There should be 0 tolerance on abuse, however minor, because when you allow minor abuses to fester, they grow wings and grow bigger. So the contributing countries, i.e. member states of the African Union, need to pay serious attention on accountability within their security forces. We see it every day on the street. You saw the one in Ikorodu Road a few weeks or months ago, when I don't know what happened to a soldier, and then they went berserk. You know, so at that level, they need to up the ante. And then when people are being considered for missions like this, as I said earlier, it needs to be seen as an ambassadorial posting, and you send your best. It's not who you like, because we know how people are picked and put on this. You know, you are related to this person is your friend, and then the lists are hastily assembled without proper vetting that is required to make sure that the bad eggs are not in them. And then after vetting and getting the call that have no record, you properly train them and deploy them. And then when they are on mission, the AU now has to take responsibility, because these soldiers have been seeded from their countries under your command.
So there has to be a reorientation.
Precisely, precisely. The mechanism, for instance, AU has no professional standard and investigation unit within its peacekeeping mission, which is supposed to be the agency or the unit that will make sure that whoever is sent out there in the field, you know, is properly supervised, which is the difference you find within UN mission. The UN is a bit better in its own mission, because all these things are in place.
All right, Innocent Chukwuma, thank you very much for coming on Africa Today.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And we also thank Latitia Bada for joining us earlier on as well. Now, despite being victims of conflict and famine for years, many say Somalis deserve a life free from terror and indignity, with soldiers expected to maintain the highest level of discipline at all times. Now, in the meantime, leaders and partners must remain committed, objective and fair in dealing with the allegations of sexual abuse and human rights violations by troops in Somalia. That's our show for today, but you can keep the conversation going as you share your thought with us on Twitter at TVC Africa Today. I am Mike Okwoche, and remember, this is Africa. Bye for now.